Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Marianne and I'm an artist and educator committed to helping you find empowerment through art. In this tutorial, I will be walking you through my landscape oil painting of Antelope Canyon. This is now my second year creating painting tutorials for YouTube, so I would love if you would take the time to like, subscribe, and comment to help me continue to build this channel. Let's get started. I always begin my paintings on a primed, toned, and sanded canvas, which gives my painting an extra smooth surface to allow my brushes to glide and eliminates all white so that I can read my colors properly. Since I have switched from using white canvases to toned canvases, I've noticed a huge improvement in my ability to read color and value, so I strongly recommend it. You'll notice that as I'm adding in the large sections of dark paint, I'm leaving the rock veins as negative space as opposed to blending them in during the same painting session. This is because the lighter sections have hints of white in them, and what I've found is that white is a notorious traveler. What I mean by that is that if I have sections of dark and white accidentally enters in, when I go to blend them, I risk turning my darker sections gray. White loves to infiltrate into other colors, and so I hedged against that by leaving the lighter sections untouched until the first dark layer had the opportunity to dry. Normally, I like to begin back to front in my paintings, but in this particular piece, I decided to start with my darkest values in the foreground to help provide some color context for the lighter values. As always, I am not using black paint here, but instead mixed my darkest value using a combination of burnt umber, ultramarine blue, and quinacridone red to warm it up a bit. If you're a subscriber, you'll know that I almost never use black paint in any of my paintings anymore. I found that black almost always looks dull and tends to flatten any color that it interacts with. The next day, after my first dark layer was mostly dry, I went in and added in the rock veins. They looked incredibly chunky, which is completely normal because chunkiness is part of the blocking in stage. When you block in a painting, you don't worry about details or creating depth through light and shadow. All of that comes later. The main concern is plunking in large blocks of color so that you can have a more accurate understanding of the basic structure of your painting. I like to think of blocking in as being similar to framing a house. You don't want to move on to the details or the decorations or painting the walls until the entire thing has been constructed. As I moved closer towards the light source, the rocks began to get warmer and warmer. It was here that I decided that I would switch the red that I was using in my limited palette, and instead of quinacridone red, used cadmium medium red instead. Quinacridone red has a magenta undertone that can sometimes feel like it's leaning cool, even when it's warmed up with oranges or yellows, while cadmium red has the fiery warmth that I was looking for. However, quinacridone red was perfect for the rocks on the left-hand side, giving it a warm undertone while still leaning closer towards the cooler end of the spectrum. As a general rule, the closer something is to the light source, the warmer it is, particularly when that light source is the sun. This was especially true with this painting and helped create a greater range of depth within the work, since I wasn't just going from the darkest to the lightest values as I got closer to my light source, but I was also gradually moving from cool to warm. When I began the first layer of the warmer orangey sections, I focused my brushwork on moving in the same direction as the rocks. In my reference photo, I could see little light flares on the ridges of the rocks, and I was tempted to add those in immediately. However, based on my style, I like to build layers of light slowly and gradually so that when the glow is finished, it appears lit from within and supported by many layers of gradually lighter highlights. In oil painting, there is a technique called alla prima, which translates from Italian into at first attempt. Essentially, it is a wet-on-wet technique where paint is applied over layers of paint that are still wet, which creates a beautiful, soft, impressionistic effect and is very clearly painterly. However, when I'm creating a work that is more photorealistic, I find that it helps to think in layers and to pay attention to where my hard edges are versus where my soft edges are. When you're creating hard edges, it's much easier to create a crisp line when the paint underneath is dry, as opposed to creating soft edges, which requires a gentle blend and needs wet paint. In this area, the sunlight was softening all of the surfaces of the rock by creating little halos of light on top of the edges, which meant that I had to do a soft blend to replicate the effect. As such, I didn't use any liquid when I was working in this area, which allowed me several days worth of blending time. It's very rare for me to ever use white straight from the tube in any of my paintings, as pure white is not often found in nature. To keep my painting feeling warm and natural, I added a hint of deep yellow to this white and used M. Graham & Co.'s fast-drying titanium white. I've never used it before, and I will definitely be using this paint again in the future. Close to this light source are where the most vibrant colors of this painting are, which helps pull the viewer's eye toward the focal point. I loved adding in pure reds, oranges, and yellows after the more subdued tones on the left, and would flick the brush to imply rays of light. The next section is perhaps my favorite in the entire painting because I love the colors and how it bridged between the fiery oranges near the light source and the cooler tones of the shadowy rocks. My favorite way to blend with oils to get definitive lines while still keeping them soft is to place half the bristles in one color, half in the other, and to go over the line repeatedly. I also like to dip the same brush into multiple colors when I have a blend between colors in the same area. The natural contamination that occurs by using the same brush helps the blend seem more natural. It's hard to believe that there's still another full layer to go, but watch what a difference it makes when I begin to add a second layer to the darks. The two dry layers pressed up together creates a richer, darker backdrop to the fiery oranges and adds a beautiful intensity and depth. When I returned to the brightest areas of the painting to do my second layer, I did two things to help the painting appear to be backlit. First, I created reflective beams shooting down the rocks beside the light source, which I could do now that the base layer was dry. I did this by using very thin applications of paint, which allowed my first layer to shine through and created some luminosity. Second, and to me this is the most important, I created a thin band of orange running down the dark rocks that were directly beside the light source. This creates the impression that the rock is lit from behind and that the edges are glowing. And I have used this trick multiple times before in landscapes with trees that are backlit. But to make the effect even more noticeable, I blended in some cadmium red medium right beside where the light source was to make it appear as though the light were warming up the entire rock and reaching the viewer. After I finished coating the dark sections in another layer and had warmed up the edges of the rocks facing the light, I went through the entire piece and added more highlights, shadows, and details. Creating a greater range of values took these areas from being merely blocked in to looking much more lifelike. After approximately 1 month of on and off work, this 36 by 48 inch painting is complete. Thank you so much for following along with this tutorial, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to write me a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on Facebook by searching Marianne Vander Visual Artist, and on Instagram at Marianne Vander. Tag me in any artwork that you'd like for me to look at, especially paintings inspired by this video. You can also join my free Facebook Art Incubator support group through the link in the description below. Keep making your life beautiful, and I'll see you in the next video.